Gay, 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 gay. Okay.
I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do the show live. What is that, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific right here on Twitch, twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. You can find the show as a podcast. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you already know where to find it. But just search for Intellectual Dollar Tree in Google or your favorite podcatcher. We're the only thing called this. You can support this project at patreon.com/Echoplex or gift out some subs in the channel here. Or you can go to echoplexmedia.com/support or echoplexmedia.com/swag. We're working on some new t-shirts. They're going to be pretty good, or maybe not. Maybe you won't buy them. Who knows? Anyway, I'm producer Dave, and you can find me on Grindr.
I'm HK Parent, and you can find me on Twitter at HK Parent, and you can find me right here on Twitch and in the chat room over there. I'm pointing at my other screen, but right over there as Sylphweed, which is my gaming channel that I game on. So if you want to see me game, go follow me at Sylphweed. Spelled like you normally do.
Fuck yeah. So we have something really good for the post game that we're going to actually probably put out as a bonus for the podcast feed. It's Jordan Peterson and his daughter going live to tell that lady that ended up dunking on Jordan Peterson in the end because he didn't like her swimsuit photo, telling her that he basically doesn't fucking care that she dunked on him. So we're going to watch that in the post game. We'll definitely put that on the podcast feed. It's not long enough for like a main episode of the show though. So we'll unfortunately have to do something else. And by something else and unfortunate, I do in fact mean Brett Weinstein, but we're not going to the Galaxy Brain Humidor. The chat has fired the Galaxy Brain Humidor. Brett is being interviewed on this guy's show. The guy calls his show UnHerd. I wish that was more accurate. A lot of people watch this idiot's show. We've watched him a couple times. Does the name sound familiar to you, HK?
No, but I've seen clips from this interview, and he just, it's eye-opening. I mean, eye-opening to the people who didn't have their eyes open.
It also maybe makes you want to super glue your own eyes and ears closed.
Yeah.
So without any further ado, here is Brett Weinstein claiming that he will be vindicated about his bad takes on COVID on this guy UnHerd. He's an IDW hanger-on who blocks a lot of people, and by a lot of people, I mean me.
Hello and welcome to UnHerd Ideas. I'm Freddie Sayers.
UnHerd Ideas? I didn't know it was called UnHerd Ideas. I just thought it was UnHerd before.
Biologist Brett Weinstein was, until not very long ago, admired across party lines.
Is the name like... did you just say Brett Weinstein was admired?
Yeah, let's go back.
UnHerd ideas. I'm Freddie Sayers. Biologist Brett Weinstein was, until not very long ago, admired across party lines as an independent thinker.
Bullshit.
Filed in the New York.
Until not long. When? What time was this?
Yeah, I call bullshit. Your first sentence is wrong.
Right.
So is UnHerd, is that a play on like everyone else is just part of the herd? Like they're all sheeple and I've woken up. Now you got to wake up, sheeple, and become part of the UnHerd.
I think I never thought of it. I just thought it was just maybe because HEARD was taken, but yeah, it could be. It's both, right? It's like these are ideas that are not heard because this is a popular channel on YouTube, and then you've unsheeped yourself. That could be it. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Is he a wake up sheeple kind of guy?
I don't know. He's one of these people, like one of these science lovers who ended up interviewing every COVID denier in the world, like during the pandemic, because that's where the fucking money. That's when you shake the money tree. That's what way the wind's blowing. So you got to go that way to catch the money.
Times, and together with the likes of Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, and his own brother Eric, he was a founding member of the so-called intellectual dark web. Then COVID happened, and his skepticism about some elements of the pandemic response, including the vaccine program, and his interest in...
Which elements was he not skeptical? I mean, skeptical to the point of absurdity about. He's still skeptical of the vaccine, despite overwhelming evidence that it does work and it has worked.
Yeah, this is a bad bet. Like skepticism is show me the money, or at least it used to be, right? Now it's like show me your titties and don't sue me for asking. But that's all.
You're not wrong about several of the people that I'll admit were the ones that got me into being a skeptic.
That's not really what skepticism means. Whatever, you can quote me on that. Fuck it.
For COVID was deemed to have crossed a line.
I was most sad about Lawrence Krauss. I'm really sad he turned out to be a sex pervert.
12 friends like Sam Harris, and his massively popular podcast, The Dark Horse, was demonetized on YouTube. Well, this week he was in London and he came into the studio to talk. I wanted to find out and probe where he had got to in his thinking and what kind of world he now feels we live in. Whether you think he went too far over the pandemic or not far enough, whether you strongly agree with him or strongly disagree with him, I hope you'll see that he gives an honest account of his experience and a sincere expression of what he thinks went wrong and what he thinks might be coming next.
So, I don't care if he gives an honest account of what his experience was, or he has a sincerity about his expression of what he thinks went wrong. This is more of that fucking shit where people are like, oh, we're going to sense make about this, right? This is where we're going to get together and we're going to have this discussion and we're going to throw empiricism out the door because, boy, isn't it great that we're having this discussion and we're going to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah.
This is bullshit. You don't sense make when your toilet's overflowing because there's shit all over your floor.
I can tell you what went wrong. Brett started saying things that were just absolutely false. I mean, he had been for a while, but he was saying stuff that was getting people hurt. And YouTube was like, no, we don't want that. We don't want that on our platform.
Well, they didn't say that. They said the advertisers don't want anything to do with this, so we're demonetizing your channel.
Yeah, true. Yeah, they didn't even take him off, so...
Enjoy.
I mean, can he really complain?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let me start with an impossibly broad, grand question, which is 2 years on from the start of this pandemic. What do you feel you have learnt about the way the world really operates that you didn't know before?
It's an interesting question. I feel like the general role that I played during COVID is one that I'm familiar with, but that this
Being a lunatic?
iteration was
Self-aggrandizement and victim mentality.
Yeah.
and that many
His
of us
brother taught him well.
have
Oh, no shit, right?
been practiced at being nuanced in the face of power and bringing along an audience, faced an enemy with much more powerful tools. And so I think one has to be
An enemy with much
not
more
sure how
powerful
much we
tools.
know
You mean
about
reality?
Yeah, yeah. Just empiricism, data.
we succeeded at and what we failed at, but we do know that we got chewed up in a way in this battle that was most unfortunate. So I think we've learned something about the power of the enemy and what it will do when the chips are down.
Do you know who that enemy is, or what that enemy is? How would you characterize?
It's just criticism. That's the enemy. Criticism of all kinds by all kinds of people. That's the enemy. Criticism.
Yep.
What if he came out right now and said the enemy is Gay Dave and HK?
Then we would win.
Yeah, we'd be like, fuck, we got you to mention us on your show. Fuck yeah. Or on any show.
I'm not sure. We know many things. I mean, there are entities that we can point to. We can point to Gavi and the Trusted News Initiative, the AP.
Are these entities in the room with you right now?
Organizations that played a role in, frankly, slandering us and misleading.
Slander is a legal term, Brett.
It is. You're right.
And if somebody was slandering him, you think he wouldn't sue? Oh, this is an I will sue you for slander guy for sure.
Yep.
Everything we say on
By
this
the
show is
way-
our opinion, and we want you to take it with a grain of salt and look into the matter yourself.
Yeah, but by the way, someone pointing out that you are wrong is not slander.
Someone pointing out that you're wrong and that you're a dumb fuck is also not slander.
Yeah.
Slander would look like Brett was convicted of child molestation in 2004, right? You're making like a truth claim that you know not to be true,
Yeah.
that is detrimental to their reputation in a way that hurts them financially or in their career. That's what slander is. Saying this guy's a dumb fuck and he can go fuck himself. Everything he's saying has been wrong and what he's doing is dangerous. That does not meet the criteria of slander. First of all, you could argue that that's true, but secondly, it's just your opinion.
Yeah. Like your opinion can be true, but it's still just your opinion.
And it's never slander if it's just your opinion. Making an assessment of someone's character is not slander.
Yeah, and there are things that just you could say like it's my opinion that, and then follow it with something that's just not an opinion, and I think that would still be slander.
Yeah, you can't like hedge your way out of that. But yeah, slander is a legal term, Brett, and it doesn't mean Sam Cedar dunked on you on the Majority Report again.
With respect to what the reliable information was and therefore what the good advice was. There's, of course, also the CDC and the WHO and Anthony Fauci. But my model...
You consider them the enemy at this point?
Well, here's the problem. I don't want to consider
he does.
the enemy, but
For
what
sure
we
he
got
does.
during COVID was not an inept response. It was the inverse of a good response. And you can't get there through incompetence. You know, had they simply failed, that would be one thing. But what they gave us was a recipe for disaster. And
What they gave us was generally good advice that people wouldn't follow.
Yeah. And it, in large part, it's because Donald Trump would constantly he would constantly politicize their advice. Like he would make it political. He made like wearing masks political. He made social distancing political. Like he made all of these things political. And what it meant was you had a huge portion of the country that in order to express their politics, they were doing things that were disadvantageous to their health. So like, yeah, I do agree that the response from the administration at the time was the inverse of a good response. But it wasn't because of the CDC and Anthony Fauci. It was because of Donald Trump.
And
solely.
And other people around him too. Brett's going to do this. He always does this every one of these. He's going to say that, oh, we were ahead of the game on masks. We were telling everybody they should be wearing masks before it was advised by the government. Problem is, the reason the government wasn't advising masks is because there just weren't enough to go around at the time when they realized that a mask was a good idea. And there weren't, like, healthcare workers were having hard times getting masks. And so,
yeah, and they were saying that.
Right. And so they saw what we did with the toilet paper.
No, but they actually said, like, I remember officials saying you don't need to wear a mask because if everyone wears masks, there won't be masks for the healthcare workers who actually need them. I don't remember where I heard that, but I heard that before they started telling people to wear masks. Like, that was their reasoning. That was their publicly known reasoning why they weren't recommending masks. Not because they didn't think they worked.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I mean, some of the pictures of what healthcare workers were like fashioning into PPE. It was like, you're dedicated to your job, but you shouldn't have to be this dedicated to any job, right? Like,
yeah.
And to the extent that they were willing to do that for whatever reason and allow the harm to flow from it that did, I have to think of them that way. These people must be removed from power lest this happen again. And I would point out, this is evident. Even just step back and recognize that the same person was responsible for sidestepping the ban on gain-of-function research that the United States wisely enacted and offshoring that work to China. That same person was the person at the forefront of our disastrous COVID response, including both.
It's time for the conspiracy rabbit hole.
Response, including both the application of vaccines in a completely unnuanced way and the sidelining of repurposed drugs that turn out to be highly effective.
Like which ones, Brett? He's talking about ivermectin.
Yeah, he's definitely talking about ivermectin, which is not effective against COVID. All of the data shows that ivermectin is not effective against COVID.
Right? They keep saying, "Oh, well, it does it. What is it in vitro or whatever?" And it's like, well, that's a petri dish. You know, a handgun would also kill the virus, and you don't use that. You don't use that on yourself when you to prevent COVID. So,
summarize that for us. What do you think the mistake was?
Well, I don't know. At some level, the policy appears optimized for delivering the maximum number of doses of an experimental treatment based on a completely novel approach to disease. That is not a rational thing to do. It was not the right tool to apply, and to become so obsessive about it that no other tool was allowed. In fact, they were actively disallowed.
This is vaccines you're referring to?
Yes, the vaccines appeared to be one size fits all.
Can we pause it for a second? So that vaccine went through the same amount of clinical research as any other vaccine. The only reason that it happened, that like it went from the beginning of research to actually being administered faster than other vaccines, is because parts of it happened in parallel rather than in series. And I will admit, for as shitty a person as Donald Trump is, he did push for his Project Warp Speed, and that did help get the vaccine through quickly.
Critical support to whoever in his administration convinced him that was a good idea, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like whoever was like, hey, listen, they're going to say that you saved the fucking world if you just allocate some government resources to getting this vaccine out. Critical support to whoever played that guy's ego like a fiddle to get this done.
Yep.
Because that's the way it I mean, there might be other ways that it happened, but the way that I described requires the absolute lowest number of assumptions.
Yeah. But I don't know if that's what Brett Weinstein means by experimental. That's probably not what he means. He probably is referring to the fact that it's the first publicly available RNA vaccine.
mRNA, but yeah.
Yeah, mRNA vaccine. But, like, so what? There have been a number of drugs that have been the first of their kind that went through the exact same amount of testing, and he's not complaining about those.
And the only way to get a new drug, a new type of drug, is to have some drug be the first of its kind. I mean,
yeah.
And it wasn't experimental. Fuck, god damn it, dude. This guy, like, whatever. I'm of the opinion that this guy's 15 minutes are about to be up, though.
I hope so.
I'm just starting to see the writing on the wall. I'm starting to see his numbers go down a little bit on his podcast. I'm starting to see more and more people dunking on him on Twitter. Starting to see more regular people knowing who he is and knowing that he's a charlatan. And that's the thing. That's when you're kind of done almost as somebody like Brett, because he kind of relies on like some kind of scientific bona fides to act like that he's not just Alex Jones in a nice shirt with a calmer tone of voice. But as soon as regular ass people figure out that you're a charlatan and you're trying to play this game, you're cooked. You're done.
I mean, I hope so. There are a lot of people who are charlatans who never lost their 15 minutes of fame.
Well, he's also like not that interesting a person. So it could be.
Yeah, true.
Eric's more likely to have staying power because Eric's like weird as fuck, right?
Yeah.
So
all solution, which is preposterous at a number of levels. For one thing, epidemiologically, it was not wise to mass vaccinate in the face of an ongoing pandemic. That's very different than vaccinating in advance of a disease outbreak. And this
but we weren't vaccinating the people who were currently going through COVID. Like, if you called up and were like, hey, I'm extremely sick with COVID right now, can I get a vaccine? They would tell you no. It won't be effective. It won't do anything.
Right. They
come
tell
back
you to
several months from now.
Right.
After like you've gotten better and it's been several months.
Right. It's and like the other problem here is that like he's arguing like a kind of counterfactual, almost like a but for, like he's sort of what he sort of has to believe is that we wouldn't be in a much worse place right now than we are if we hadn't had the vaccine. Do you know what I'm saying? For what he's saying to be true or to make sense, he would have to believe that we'd be in much the same place as we are now or better if we didn't have a vaccine for COVID-19.
I think that he thinks, or at least he says he thinks, that if we had gone, rather than the vaccine route, if we had gone the horse paste route, we would be better off now, which I just completely disagree.
Well, to me,
ivermectin did not work.
His fans are going to come after me. They don't come after you. So he was not advocating that people take the horse paste. He was telling people to get ivermectin for humans.
Well, yeah, but I'm just referring to it colloquially as the horse paste.
The thing that happened though is because people couldn't get it prescribed because their doctor was like, "Why would I prescribe this to you just because some guy on YouTube said you should take it?" Which is what your doctor should say, right? Like,
yeah.
And then your pharmacist, you go doctor shopping enough, you find when the pharmacist is like, they weren't giving it out either, and so some people were in fact for a time trying to use a veterinary version of it that came in the form of paste for a horse. I think that was overblown, and I think a lot less people did that than most people think. But I'm just telling you that people fucking come for me when we say shit like that. They don't come for you. So I'll go ahead and bring that up. But yeah, he was just advocating for a treatment that nobody had any reason to believe worked. And he was saying that we just need to give this to everybody and the pandemic will be over in fucking 3 weeks or some shit, which is wild speculation.
And he was claiming to use it himself. He said that he was on.
No, they took it on air.
Did they?
Yeah, they took it on. Or, I mean, I don't have any reason not to believe what, you know what I'm saying? I don't have any reason to believe they took a sugar pill instead, you know?
Yeah.
They said they were giving it to their kids. Like,
yeah. At what point does that, like, if you're in charge of kids and you're giving them what can only be described as like malpractice medical treatment, like at what point does that become child abuse?
oh, they're upper middle class and white, so never.
Yeah. Or when their kid dies, then they get charged.
Maybe.
Stratified. There were lots of people, even if these vaccines had been excellent with no known hazard associated with them, there were lots of people who...
That's a nirvana fallacy, right? We don't, like, whatever. Like, he's like, no known hazard. Motherfucker, Tylenol has a few known hazards. And we generally think...
Tylenol has a lot of known hazards.
Right, but what I'm saying is, we're not going to get into what the known hazards of Tylenol are. We generally think of acetaminophen as safe if used as directed.
Yeah, but more people have died of Tylenol than of the COVID vaccine.
Oh, absolutely.
Simply didn't need them. People who were safe from COVID by virtue of the fact that they were young and healthy, people who should have been kept away from those things because they were more vulnerable in light of the fact that they were pregnant or nursing, or even simply because they were female and we hadn't tested the question of what the effects were on the female reproductive apparatus. All of those things could have...
This shit again,
we did,
too.
Though.
But they were just always saying that it makes women infertile, and there's just no fucking evidence of that. They're just like...
Yeah, like, it was recommended that pregnant women take it.
Yeah.
Because we knew what happens if you get COVID and you're pregnant. Like, that's dangerous for the mother and the embryo. Fetus? The fetus.
More nuanced application of those tools if we indeed believed in them, but somehow the policy was the more vaccination, the better.
Yes!
So I'm kind of fast forwarding here to the central question in a way, but I feel like it's almost the fundamental one, which is, do you see that, as you describe it, a mistake or incorrect tool usage, or however you want to characterize it, do you see it as some sort of hysteria or mass event that people just sort of encourage?
Just say mass formation psychosis, like that weird Robert Malone guy said. Just say it, dude. You know what you want to say. Just say mass formation psychosis. Just say it.
They're into a certain state where that happens almost by accident, which I feel is quite a different view of the world to actually feeling like there are malevolent powers somewhere out there that were somehow steering this into existence. Where do you sort of fall on that spectrum?
Well, I would like to leave open every possibility that is still live. I think one of the most important things to do in a case like this, where you know that you don't have good information about what went on behind the scenes,
is to shut the fuck up about what went on behind the scenes because you don't know.
Jump to conclusions. And so I tend to think in terms of setting a floor, right? What is the least bad interpretation of the response that we got? And I'll give you the least the least troubling interpretation. I will say I don't
most
quite
generous.
believe it, but it is this. Pharma, every day of the year for decades, has corrupted our system. That's what it does. It's its business model. It does all sorts of things in this regard. It incentivizes academics to say things they would not otherwise do. It writes papers and it seeks out authors after the fact to advance those papers into journals.
Sounds like Brett mad that Big Pharma didn't come to him and try to get him to do that.
It corrupts our public health structures. It does all of these things as a matter of course, because at the end of the day, what pharma is a business that needs to have a medical need that can plausibly be associated with some compound over which it has intellectual property rights. And so how can you increase your profit in such a world? Well, you might manufacture a disease, you might broaden the definition of a disease so more people appear to have it, you might adjust the way trials reflect on the efficacy of the particular compound at your disposal, right? You might sabotage a competing molecule over which you don't have intellectual property rights. There are lots of ways to increase your
Big Pharma sabotaging a competing molecule since the Galaxy Brain Humidor started.
But like, he's not going to mention that a lot of these drugs have an enormous barrier between them being produced and them getting to the patient, and that's a doctor. A doctor's not going to prescribe you a drug that you don't need.
Right. But in
or
the
that
case
they feel like you don't need.
So in the case of the vaccine for COVID, I just went to the fucking football stadium and fucking, I don't know, the head coach of the 49ers prescribed me the vaccine. I don't know. And so in this case, I didn't go to my doctor to get the vaccine, right? I went to a mass vaccination center, which is a frightening thing for conspiracy theorists. And the pharmaceutical companies made their money on this, but they did not like dose per dose. They weren't making shit, right?
So, the reason though that it was available to you was because there were doctors that recommended that people who fit your description get the vaccine.
Doctors, public health officials. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's still doctors in the way of the pharmaceutical company just saying like, all right, everyone has this disease we just invented and everyone needs to buy this thing that we just invented to cure this disease we just invented.
No, that's why you need the New World Order conspiracy, HK.
The doctors are in on it too.
Yeah, of course.
All the way up.
Well, enough of them have to be. They're all part of the New World Order. They manufactured the virus in a fucking lab in China. They lied to you and said it came from a wet market in China. And that there's just a little misdirection while they were making a vaccine that's going to, I don't know, make your ears fall off in 35 years. And so then you have to get like special ear glue from Big Pharma to put your ears back on.
I forgot all the doctors were in on it too.
Everybody's in on it.
Never mind what I just said.
It's actually a big ear adhesive conspiracy.
The point is, this was all well understood before COVID, right? It wasn't widely understood at a high level of detail, but people studied the question, and pharma, this is how it behaved. And so what I'm saying in terms of the least troubling interpretation is that pharma has a mechanism by which it profits. That mechanism is not public spirited. It may be in the interests of the shareholders, but it's not in the interests of patients. And it operates all the time. And when COVID hit, there was no mechanism to turn it off. In other words, it viewed everything through the same lens that would normally have been used in the context of a more mundane disease and more normal pharmaceuticals. And
what does he think cured all of the horrible diseases we used to have?
But that was back before the disc or whatever had captured science, right? Like most of the vaccines that we have today were, even though they've been iterated on since, were developed in the 50s and 60s. Like they just were.
Sure.
And so this is back when white guys like Brett and his brother would have been at the top of the science pyramid. So he thinks that like literally they believe a version of the civil rights movement and postmodernism have corrupted the sciences to the point where these kinds of conspiracies are now popular because are possible inside of these organizations because the right people aren't in charge, and by the right people that aren't in charge, think of a word that rhymes with right, and then you get a lot of a glimpse into like what him and his brother and Jordan Peterson in a different way are kind of putting out there.
Okay.
Vaccines are just a convenient one because of the time frame when most of our current vaccines were developed, even though they've been iterated on and made safer and more effective after some black lady showed up at the fucking virology department and ruin the whole thing.
Yeah. But like, even if you concede that like all of the vaccines that we've been using were developed in like the 50s and 60s, or at least their development began in the 50s and 60s, still we have like new drugs that have combated huge health problems, and those problems were fixed or mostly fixed due to those new drugs. For example, HIV now is not the death sentence that it was back in the 80s, and that's because of big pharma. And like, sure, it sucks that like big pharma charges a lot for those things, but like that's just the way our system works. And if it were paid for by taxes, which, you know, a lot of times it is anyway, and you just pay for it again when you buy it. If it were paid for by taxes and then given away for free or at cost, that would be a much better system. That would be awesome. But that's not our system. And
not for nothing, one of the big complaints about pharmaceutical industry is that they profit off of research that was publicly funded.
Yep.
Like a lot of the stuff that comes out of the universities or whatever, a lot of the research that's used to create some of these drugs. And so it's not like the pharmaceutical companies are spending a lot of money on R&D. They're spending a lot of money on fucking intellectual property protection and marketing. It's not that they don't spend anything on R&D, but they're not actually incentivized to do that when they already have drugs they can market and protect their copyright on. They're happy to let the universities do the research, like, and to try to find new drugs. They're happy to let, even some privately funded groups that are just, philanthropy like funded that research into like possible new drugs. They're happy to let those groups do it because they ain't got to do it and they can monetize it later. And so that's one of the complaints against the pharmaceutical industry. But Brett doesn't care about that either, because the universities have been captured by that same black lady that showed up at the virology department, also showed up at the sociology department, and she brought snacks, and now everybody likes her, and the whole thing's fucked up. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like the time they're pining away for, like when the time that him and especially his brother, but him too, that they say everything went wrong. Certain things were happening in the country right around that time too.
Yeah.
Once we got, in other words, we saw very good drugs that weren't under patent demonized in order to remove the obvious.
Nobody demonized ivermectin. He's talking about ivermectin. Ivermectin was a fucking deliverance. There is basically no more fucking river blindness because of ivermectin. That's amazing. That's a wonder drug. But river blindness was a parasite.
Yes. So for the things that it works for, ivermectin is great, and it has never been demonized.
Right. Now,
saying you shouldn't use this thing for an untested reason is not demonizing it.
Right. And the problem I see here too is after all this, right, somebody's going to have a condition for which ivermectin is the best treatment. Now you're going to have doctors trying to convince them that the doctor's not giving you something fucking stupid after all this, right? Because there's going to be people that go the other way, because people are just people and don't have time to look into everything. People are going to hear that ivermectin is a quack cure for COVID. They're going to get something maybe down the line where the ivermectin is the right treatment, and they're not going to want to take it now because of all this bullshit that's been spread around it, because they're maybe rightfully skeptical just because the word has been in the news in the way that it has.
Yeah.
In order to facilitate the acquisition of the emergency use authorization. And then we saw the product that was, the first one in this new market sector, pushed through all sorts of mechanisms, through a PR campaign, through mandates, all sorts of ways of getting people to accept them. And we saw the demonization of anybody who looked at this and said, it doesn't add up.
Is there not a danger of being...
Wait, did he just say the vaccine was never demonized?
Sort of, yeah.
Hard disagree.
Well, Brett, but when Brett does what he does, you see that's never demonizing. You have to understand, HK, that demonizing is something that happens to Brett. And Eric.
Sure, even if Brett didn't demonize it, he can't possibly say that no one else did, because there were people who were literally saying that the vaccine was from the devil.
Then that is probably the technical definition of demonizing it, actually.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's the thing is, like, if Brett is saying something wrong and inflammatory about this or that, he's not demonizing it. I'm just telling you, demonization happens to Jordan Peterson, Brett, Eric Weinstein, maybe Barry Weiss occasionally, sometimes to Dave Rubin, although they don't like Dave Rubin anymore. So the idea that he would talk about demonization is funny because he thinks that demonization is a thing that happens to him, maybe during this very show.
Big Pharma with too much power in this scenario.
You know, if I believed in demons, I would probably believe that Brett Weinstein was one of them.
Big Pharma with too much power in this scenario. You describe it as the floor. I feel like we could potentially go lower and even less troubling than what you have said, which is that actually during a time of crisis, governments that now talk to each other so closely via social media and so on, and movements that have so much power, encourage a kind of herd mentality, and that can make people somewhat blinkered. Most people are wise to these facets of Big Pharma and have been for a long time. Is it not maybe closer to the truth that this was just a sense of the best solution out there? Everyone wanted to win the prize and solve this and get the virtue points, and therefore maybe some mistakes were made.
Wait, people wanted to go win the prize and get the virtue points for going and getting the vaccine? Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
Virtue signaling the vaccine.
Get the fuck out of here.
They did give out little stickers that said, "I got vaccinated."
It's a literal virtue signal for your shirt. Or maybe your laptop. You can virtue signal it right on your laptop with your other stickers.
Well, like, that's just how public campaigns work. Like, they do the same thing when you vote.
Yeah, I know. Even though some people are trying to get you not to. That's a whole different story.
I feel certain that didn't happen. That is below the floor of plausibility.
Wait, why?
And I know that because I watched myself and others demonized by what was obviously a coordinated campaign to take our perspective off the table. And so I guess what I would say is
a coordinated campaign by the data.
And people who'd been making fun of you since before this, scientists, other biologists, other podcasters, people on Twitter you've never met, the entirety of the science-based medicine crew, Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, like fucking even your friend Sam Harris was telling people not to listen to you at one point. It was the whole world, man.
Anyone who understands the data obviously was just demonizing Brett.
What's the opposite of just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you? What's the opposite of that? Because that's what he's got going on.
I don't know.
to consider the question of what is a scientific consensus. What we got was a phony one. We got
What? A fake consensus. All the fake scientists didn't do what I said.
What, sir? What? What we got was, what is a scientific consensus? What we got was a fake one. As in, scientists weren't actually in consensus and people were just saying the scientific consensus agrees that you're an idiot? Or does he mean that, like, the scientists did have a consensus that Brett Weinstein was wrong, but that consensus was based on just purposeful fakery?
It was.
What does he mean?
Yeah, it was like a coordinated effort to go after specifically like Brett and Robert Malone. And I forget the guy's name now. We were calling him anti-vaccine Jim Cramer because the way he yells. and like Del Bigtree and shit. Like it was a coordinated effort by everyone who knows anything about the matter to just go after you. A lot of people, by the way, who know a lot about this matter didn't want none of this bullshit. Just to be clear, like there's a lot of people who didn't say shit about these people. Very few like virologists or people involved in public health said anything about these people. There was not a coordinated campaign to smear Brett. To the extent that there was, it exists on just a few podcasts, honestly.
Yeah. There probably was a coordinated campaign to just not mention these things, to try and not give it more airtime than it was already getting. Because, like, it had been proven wrong so many times. Like, why keep mentioning it?
That caused anybody who saw a different picture to be marginalized, so that only one interpretation would remain. That one interpretation happens to fit exactly what was best for pharma
With
and
reality.
especially companies. It's
yeah,
we tend
sure.
to talk about pharma as if it's one thing, but it isn't. It's multiple, competing corporations, and the response just so happens.
I mean, if you take what he just said there, and you kind of ask yourself, why is it that the one interpretation that was left was the one that fit with what Big Pharma was saying? Could it be because what Big Pharma was saying was correct?
Or, and the other thing is he's lumping in like public health officials, university research, fucking research done in countries where they have fucking single payer healthcare systems where pharma doesn't run the show. He's lumping that all in into to Big Pharma, right?
Big Pharma.
Yeah, but he's lumping all that into like one thing that all of it isn't.
Yeah, you're right. Like Big Pharma kind of has a pretty strict definition. Like the CDC is not Big Pharma.
There are issues with regulatory capture and stuff, but that's more with the FDA than the CDC. The CDC doesn't regulate pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
The FDA does.
Why does he think that everyone landed on the same consensus, on the same resolution here? And it was only him and a handful of other people who just did not believe that. Could it be because you were wrong, Brett?
And not for nothing, like he didn't have like a say. Like just because he's like a biologist who does sense making doesn't mean that there's any reason to listen to him about the fucking properties of a fucking vaccine.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't listen to any specific virologist or infectious disease specialist either. That's why people write papers and they're peer reviewed. And then after these papers are peer reviewed, you have meta analysis, and then you have people going back and trying to replicate other studies to make like that's the fucking thing that everybody's kind of putting their trust in here. And sure, that system's going to have flaws like any other system because there's fucking people in it. But it's the same reason your fucking cell phone works. Is because somebody figured out how to do a thing and then other people tested it. They're like, oh shit, I guess you did.
Yeah. And everyone came to a consensus about this is the standard that we're all going to use so that all of these different phones can communicate over the same network. And Brett's over there just like, I invented this new kind of cell phone service and no one's using it. And it's a conspiracy against me.
The reason it doesn't work actually is that the cell phone providers are stopping me from connecting to the cell phone service.
Was in the best interests of pharma and turns out to have been a disaster for people. Turns out to have been a disaster for people in a way that many of us saw. So the fact that
what turned out to be a disaster?
Wait, these things.
What about the vaccines has been a disaster? They worked pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, all things considered, the short amount of time they were ramped up in, the fact that it was a new technology that we hadn't used in a vaccine before, all things considered, that went pretty fucking well.
Yeah, I mean, they're still working. They are currently working, still. to this day.
Is vital. It tells you that this was visible from a year ago and a year and a half ago.
What was visible from a year ago? Like this was visible. What is this? I wish this fucking interviewer would say.
He just means everyone died. Everyone who took the vaccine, we all died.
From a year ago and a year and a half ago.
So spell that out. What as you see it is this disaster? Because most people, if you polled them on the street, would feel like overall the vaccine program has been very helpful and that has prevented older and vulnerable people from getting sick with COVID and allowed us
Oh shit! The interviewer asked a good question.
reopen society. That is what most people believe.
He's gonna let Brett talk forever and not answer the fucking question. Watch.
This disaster.
First of all, that's far from clear. We are not out of the woods. We have seen a proliferation of disease variants, which was predicted by Geert Vanden Bossche, who incidentally believes that proliferation of variants is going to continue. We have, if your argument is that it prevented vulnerable and infirm people from going into the hospital, well, then the question is, why didn't we vaccinate those vulnerable people and leave others out of it, given how little we knew about the effects? We can now.
Because that's not how a vaccine works, you fucking idiot.
Yeah, we were trying to reach herd immunity.
Right. The vaccine.
Which you would think he would know.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is the vaccine isn't so much for me as it is for somebody who I don't even know, who I'm going to fucking accidentally bump into at the store. And that person is immunocompromised or for some reason cannot get the vaccine. They have a medical reason they can't get the vaccine. Vaccine is not for me. It's for everyone else. And me, but mostly for everyone else.
Yeah, it is certainly also for you. Even if you're young and healthy people still died of COVID.
When Heather and I started reacting, Heather's my wife, she is my another evolutionary biologist and my fellow podcaster. When we started talking about our concern that it was clear that these vaccines could not possibly be safe in the way that we were being told. That doesn't mean they were harmful, but when we say safe, if you walk into a room and there is a gun on the table and you pick it up and you put it to your head and you pull the trigger and it goes click, you may not have been harmed, but it was not a safe behavior. Safe means it is known to be harmless. These vaccines couldn't possibly have been.
Okay, but yeah, like if there's statistics involved here. If 1,000 people did that, 1,000 different instances of this same behavior happening, sure, like some people wouldn't be harmed, but a whole lot of people would, and we would know that. And based on that evidence, we'd say this behavior is very unsafe.
But again, he's just for no reason drawing the comparison, right? Like I can't come up with a reason for him to draw the comparison he's drawing.
Yeah, I don't know. Like it's very overwhelmingly clear that the vaccine was safe and is safe. If it weren't safe, a lot more people would be dead.
When they hadn't been around for even a year. There was no way to know what they would do to people 5 years out and 10 years out. So we needed.
Yeah, but we're not going to test a vaccine for 10 years when it could save people's lives now. Like,
right.
Sure, there's a ridiculously slim 1 in a septillion chance that 15 years out, people's ears might start falling off.
That's the plan, actually. Shh.
But we're not going to sit there and test the vaccine for 5 or 10 or 15 years.
Listen,
We
dude,
never
I'm heavily,
do that with
I'm
any drug.
I'm heavily leveraged on some ear adhesive futures, so like just keep it on the low.
We never do that with any drug, and I'm sure Brett is fine with taking other drugs that didn't go through 15 years of testing. Ivermectin didn't go through 15 years of testing before it was deemed safe for humans to take it.
Brett has sung the praises of psychedelic drugs in the past. Do you think the sheet of acid he got his hit of acid off of went through fucking clinical trials?
who knows? Maybe the acid, sure, but like, what was in the acid?
Well, that's LSD. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I mean, like, was there fentanyl in that acid?
It wouldn't work that way because it's on sheets of paper. But anyway,
Okay,
yeah.
I guess I don't know that much about drugs.
He has sung the praises of psychedelic drugs in the past, and most of these are not FDA approved. So, until the FDA gets involved, you get what you get, right?
Yeah.
In order to have informed consent, we needed to have awareness about what risks and unknowns we were facing. And a rational policy in the face of the risks and unknowns that existed even before any harm was in evidence would have involved being sparing with these things for people who were safe from COVID by virtue of the fact that they were young.
Didn't he get like
right?
So when I went and got my vaccine, they gave me like a sheet that was like, here's the side effects of the vaccine, the side effects you might experience. Like they do that with every drug. For every drug you're given, you're also given a little sheet that says, here's the potential side effects.
Yeah, I didn't even read it because I was so steeped in all this fucking shit that I kind of knew what was going on already. You know what I'm saying? Like I knew what the consensus was and what some of the risks were. And I didn't bother reading it. I asked the person giving me my first shot if I was going to have 5G now, and they just looked at me and they said, "You're the first person who's ever asked me that question here." I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be lame." She was like, "It's okay, baby," and then just fucking stabs me. It's like, "Go sit down."
That would have been at a minimum.
I would have laughed at your joke,
Some
Dave.
of your position on this vaccine question, is it that you do think it was worthwhile to vaccinate older and vulnerable people, even despite the risks, because of the apparent risks of COVID, but as you go down the age spectrum, it became less of a good risk-reward ratio, and we should have not done it for younger people, or what is your take overall?
It's not my role to say what the policy is, but I can't.
That's why that's what you're gonna say, because then you could just say that, oh, I was right all along because I fucking said this was bad, and this was bad. You never said what should be the good one. So like,
just watch after this sentence. So this sentence, he's saying it's not my role to say what the policy is, but in the next sentence that he says, just watch, he's going to say what the policy should be.
I can tell you that what we did wasn't rational. In my opinion, I don't think we should have vaccinated anyone because the risks and unknowns were too great, and we had alternatives, which then brings us to the next topic, which is, did we...
There you go. Was I right? I was right.
It was a pivot to we have treatments. We have unproven treatments that I thought that everybody should take.
He also disagreed with himself from earlier, because if you remember earlier, he said, why don't we give vaccines to those vulnerable groups and not give it to the healthy, uncompromised people, people with a healthy immune system? Why don't we not give it to them? Like earlier, that's what he said. And now he's saying we shouldn't have given it to anyone.
He's just a full-on anti-vaxxer. He went from COVID vaccine, I don't know, not skeptic. Skeptic's not the right word, but misinformer, to now just basically thinking people shouldn't take vaccines at all. Is that's where he's headed. He's most of the way there, actually.
And the campaign that was deployed to derail the out-of-patent drugs that really do work, to derail those things so that we would have no choice, was,
but they don't work,
in many
Brett.
ways, the most unconscionable thing that happened.
So
that's the problem, is those things don't work. They never did work for COVID. Every time we've ever ran a big enough trial with enough people to show that it works, if it works, it's shown that it doesn't work.
Right. He's relying on meta-analysis of low-quality studies. And I just asked somebody, I was like, well, what's going on here with this meta-analysis? They said, well, you ever heard garbage in, garbage out? Yep. And I said, well, yeah, I know what that is. They're like, well, that's what a meta-analysis is if the studies you're pulling from are bad. If they were not well-conducted studies, you have 7 of them, it doesn't make them good all of a sudden. Right? It's like if some restaurant has shitty food and then the next restaurant next to it has shitty food and the restaurant down the street has shitty food and then the restaurant across the street from that restaurant has shitty food. You can't then come out with a meta-analysis of the neighborhood and call it a food mecca. You know what I'm saying? Like,
if you keep shitting in a big pile, eventually you're just going to have a big pile of shit.
but then you add it to other people's piles of shit and it turns into diamonds.
Well, that
is the
you might actually eventually be able to do that. Like, shit's got a lot of carbon in it.
I said the word "you" though, assuming that like as a human is going to do. A human can't.
most unconscionable thing that happened.
So this is principally ivermectin.
Not
we're
principally.
talking about,
It's, I would say, the two.
hydrochloroquine.
Yeah, those two, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, both appear to work. That is surprisingly clear, but it's clear in the data. It is not clear in the papers in which the data was presented. In other words, someone sought to obscure the efficacy.
Oh no, there was they ran the trials and there was a saboteur now. Did you hear what he just said?
Yeah. Someone sought to, yeah.
Yeah, there's like a fucking spy versus spy happening at the ivermectin the ivermectin test.
So he won't even believe the actual, like the data about ivermectin, because if he's shown data that disagrees with him, he'll just say, oh, well, that data was faked.
Right. Somebody got in there and I don't know, they fucking fucked up the study. Like he won't believe that the bad studies were bad and he won't believe that the good studies are good. And they're not even good studies. Like finding out that a drug doesn't work to treat something is actually bad because the outcome is better for everyone involved, including the pharmaceutical companies, if the drug works.
Yeah.
He's like, they're out of patent, but do you think Pfizer wasn't going to like find a way to like repatent a specific like variation on the fucking thing to sell it to you in some kind of ritzy pack? You know what I'm saying? And fucking mark that shit up.
Yeah.
Marketing companies,
like,
motherfucker.
It's like with Ritalin. Like Ritalin was out of patent and then Concerta came along and just repackaged Ritalin into a different pill that had a different delivery method. And boom, you got a patented pill.
Like these companies are super, super evil geniuses and they can't figure out how to get around the fact that something's out of patent. They can't figure out how to make it just slightly different enough that they can repatent it. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Like you don't actually have to patent the compound. You can patent the delivery mechanism of it. Like you can literally patent just the pill, not what's in the pill, just the pill itself, like the capsule.
You can even just patent the fucking name, I bet. Like you give it a new name and just patent the name and the marketing around it, right? Or you copyright all that stuff.
You can trademark the name.
Yeah, yeah. But
but someone else can just make a generic. Like that's what methylphenidate is. It's just the generic name for Ritalin. And other companies make methylphenidate. But like Concerta came along and took methylphenidate, the drug, and put it in a new delivery mechanism, and boom, it's patented now.
Pounds.
So this is, I guess, the most controversial topic that you have tackled during this.
Oh, but I was gonna say this right here, like his example of like you can't even trust the studies because there's someone there sabotaging it. This is a perfect example, a textbook example of motivated reasoning.
Conspiracism. Yeah, it's just full on. Again, somebody is out to get me, essentially.
Yep. And he's supposed to be a public intellectual.
Well, you know what we've learned on this journey through the intellectual Dollar Tree is that that's actually not a good thing to be.
Yep.
Just somebody who's a private intellectual who has some expertise in a matter and can explain something to you is way better than one of these fuckers.
Yep.
So this is, I guess, the most controversial topic that you have tackled during this pandemic. You're still in the same place. You still feel that the evidence is on your side. Is there anything around this whole question that you regret saying, or give us a summary? Do you feel vindicated at this point?
Well, I feel the evidence has vindicated us. I don't think people understand that we were vindicated. In other words, I frequently am accused of failing to admit that I got this one wrong. Now, I know the evidence in detail. I didn't get it wrong. I mean, the evidence is still emerging, but to the extent, do I have regrets? Yeah, I have one important regret in this regard, which is that I put too much weight on the Carvalho study. And it turned out that the Carvalho study, which at the point that it became clear something wasn't right with it, I pursued the data. I asked...
That's the study that they cited and didn't read. They cited the study on their fucking show. I'm like 90% sure that's the one that they cited. And by the end of the episode, anybody who read the study, it was clear they didn't.
Didn't they say that they didn't read it?
I think, yeah. I think that's the one where they fucking ran it on air and said that, yeah. I think, well, we haven't read this yet. I think we made fun of that.
Yeah.
Probably for 5 minutes, which is forever in intellectual dollar time.
Carvalho to give me the data so I could scrutinize it and figure out how good it was. And in the end, I believe what happened is that this Argentinian professor ran a study and it was sloppy. It wasn't fraudulent as far as I can tell, but it was sloppy. It reflected high efficacy, but at the point that I discovered that the data set wasn't forthcoming because it had been done as a tally instead of, a spreadsheet that collected all of the data that you would want in a way that was possible to recreate what had taken place. At the point that I discovered that the data set wasn't up to snuff, I went public and I said, look, I am taking my confidence in this study and I am saying it should have a 0 weight. But putting that study at 0 changed my confidence in ivermectin slightly, but not much.
But the meta-analysis you were leaning on relied heavily on that study because it was the study with the most people in it.
All of the meta-analyses rely on shit-ass studies.
Right.
Like any meta-analysis that came out and was like, oh, ivermectin is wonderful, it always relied on shitty studies because the best studies that we had showed that ivermectin didn't work for COVID.
So, right. And this guy has spent a good deal of time during the pandemic saying that too much weight is put on a double-blind placebo-controlled studies. And it's like, well, that's how you fucking test a medicine. Like, how the fuck else do you test the medicine?
Yeah, that's how you test to make sure it works.
That's how you test to make sure that people don't. They're like, oh, I'm getting the placebo, and then they're going to be like, well, it didn't work. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to do that.
No, you can't just go to a patient and be like, here, take this sugar pill. It's not real. Let's see what it does.
Right. Unless they, I don't know, maybe they just needed a little bit of sugar and so they felt better, but that's not likely. And it's not long term. It's not going to help them.
Arguably, though, even then, you could still get an effect because a lot of, people don't realize a lot of the placebo effects, there are a number of effects that we call the placebo effect. A lot of them don't rely on you realizing that you're taking a medicine or whatever. Like, just regression to the mean is a placebo effect. Just your natural, the natural tendency for someone to get better over time is a placebo effect. If you don't control for that, it can hurt your data. It can give you false confidence.
Right. And that's why any person pushing ivermectin was going to, if they were Brett, try to undermine the efficacy and the basically the gold standard status of double-blind placebo controlled studies, because those are the ones that were like, this stuff doesn't work any better than placebo. And so he wouldn't just be like, oh, well, I guess I got this wrong. He'd be like, aha, your methodology is bad. You should do a podcast about it instead. Do you know David Fuller?
And the reason is because the sum total of the data still tells the same story. It adjusts the strength slightly, but it doesn't change the outcome.
Let me just push back, if I may.
Sure.
I guess the bigger picture is the part that I find harder to go along with, which is that in order for the picture you're painting to be correct, the world's governments, each individual government, which has within them individuals such as you or I who can look at these data points and draw their own conclusions, would all have to have willfully ignored these conclusions in order to deny their people a cheap and free and available cure to a disease. And to my mind, that is above the ceiling of plausibility.
Yes, I agree. It's above the ceiling of plausibility the way you've just described it, but I don't think that's the way it unfolds. In other words,
he's like, have you heard about the New World Order? That's what,
like, what he described makes total sense. Like, if it's true that this thing is being brushed under the rug by what Brett's idea of big pharma, like, so many people would have to be in on that conspiracy and want to just line the pockets of big pharma execs.
Right. And like the average person, even nobody at the CDC is really interested in the financial well-being of the fucking CEO of Pfizer. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
They're connected in a way, and there's like perverse incentives there, but nobody there like actually is there to advocate for the CEO or the CFO of Pfizer to get a big old raise. Like,
yeah, and certainly not at the expense of whatever other company is manufacturing ivermectin.
Oh, yeah. Man, hold on. This is great.
A lot of emergent phenomena here. And I would point out, if I can, the way to see what has happened requires us to step into another part of COVID to understand how these processes unfold. Let's take a look at the vaccine mandates. The vaccine mandates require...
What he's going to do is not answer the question. Do you...
Well, he just said, like, sure, in the way that you described it, it sounds crazy. So let me change the subject so that I don't sound crazy, because you just described what I think.
People to accept a product about which little was known, and a product that was entirely novel in terms of the way its mechanism of action. That is a violation of Nuremberg.
You're all the people go to the city council screaming about the Nuremberg fucking trials and shit during the fucking COVID. He's just doing that, but on UnHerd. Nuremberg.
Like, I would agree with him if like it had never been tested at all. If someone was just like, if some company was just like, here we go, here's our new vaccine, and the CDC was like, perfect, ship it.
Right.
Yeah, I would totally agree with him. But that's not what happened.
And not for nothing, like the
vigorous testing.
The Nuremberg Code isn't like the law anywhere either. So that's also, it's like a thing. It's like, yeah, it's just not the law anywhere.
So he's wrong in two ways.
Yes.
It's impossible because people don't know what was in these vaccinations, and they don't have enough information to understand what risks they may be facing. Those who did not accept these mandates were removed from many of these institutions, right? Doctors lost their professions and their licenses. People were purged from government. And in the aftermath of that, right, we've had a violation of Nuremberg, and those who did not accept that violation of Nuremberg have now been removed from their positions of power. Our system has just become much more amenable to violations of Nuremberg. Now, does that mean that the people who are left...
It turns out, if you're bad at your job, you lose your job.
Also, not for nothing, they talk about the doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals as if like that's not one of the industries with the highest vaccine uptake, where the people, the doctors and whoever who would not take the vaccine or whatever, they were just not, they had little to no impact on like the capacity of your local hospital. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like it was maybe like 1 out of like 1,000 doctors who was like, I don't know about this vaccine.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but yeah, it wasn't significant.
All the other doctors were like, maybe we should let that guy go because all he does is browse Facebook all day long, and now he's not even treating his patients.
Right? Why are you yelling "Dark Horse" in the hallway, Dr. Fred?
Accepted these mandates and did what they were told are bad people? No. Does it mean they're inclined towards violating Nuremberg? No. But it means that a process of effectively natural selection has produced a system that is now much more compliant. And the question is, who was going to stand up?
Well, that wasn't the question, though. The question was, are you not positing a New World Order conspiracy theory to explain why you're doing what you're doing? And he's doing a version of that too, right? He's now talking about the New World Order kicking out all the fucking real good doctors from it. It's the same fucking thing.
Yep.
And say, actually, we should be applying these medicines. Did people stand up? And if so, what happened to them? Well, I can tell you that there was an extremely aggressive campaign to demonize these compounds, to portray them as dangerous, and to portray those who talked about them as reckless. So a system of incentives causes...
I'll agree with part of that. Like, no one was saying that ivermectin itself is dangerous. I mean, the dose makes the poison, right? Anything in excess is dangerous. Like water in excess is dangerous. If all you're doing is drinking water for like 2 hours and you're not letting yourself go to the bathroom, you might die from that. So, like, I'm not demonizing water by saying that. And I'm not demonizing water by saying don't drink water if you don't need any water. So, like, saying don't take ivermectin if you don't need ivermectin is not demonizing it.
And not for nothing, ivermectin doesn't have feelings. Like, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't really care if you demonize it or not because it's a chemical compound.
Yeah. And also saying, like, you shouldn't take any drug, ivermectin or any other drug, if you don't need it, because every drug inherently has a risk. So doing that is inherently risky. Like, saying that isn't calling ivermectin dangerous. Like, I'm saying you shouldn't take it if you don't need it, because why take the risk if there's never going to be a reward?
Or even not, like, what if the risk isn't even to yourself necessarily, right? Let's take that out of the equation. What if enough people buy it that they're taking it away from people who actually need it because there's like a limited supply, and whoever was making it, because Brett said there wasn't a lot of profit margin to it, right? Because it was like out of patent. So whoever's making it, they're probably not making a ton of cash on it because they got a lot of competition. So they're only making as much as they need. Now there's a run on it, and now people who need it are going to have a hard time getting it. So
yeah, it's like when people were selling rolls of toilet paper for like $10.
This everything, we can just bring it back to the toilet paper, honestly.
Not to say what they know, and causes many people to reject that knowledge because they know that if they accept that knowledge, it will result in a catastrophe in their own lives. It will result in the elimination of their ability to earn, for example.
Is it not much easier to get to that point, that same atmosphere, which personally, I go along with you some of the way here. I feel like the process was far from perfect. There was a certain very intense mood that could be called hysterical. It was a lot of sort of moralistic judgment of anyone who dissented, and the whole period is regrettable in a lot of ways, and we should hopefully learn from it. You don't have to actually posit a kind of malign power that is somehow...
But he does.
All of these forces together. I guess that for me is the big jump, that it's hard to follow you down.
Here's the problem.
I'm just not going to answer the question no matter how you try to ask it. And you're a punk, and you're not going to push back on me and say you're not answering my question.
He's just demonizing him. Don't you see? He's just demonizing him by pointing out the major flaws in his argument.
So the thing is, like, the people who are inclined to like the sense-making world are going to see this and be like, look, this guy pushed back on Brett. Look, this guy pushed back on Brett. And sure, but before he said it, he said, let me push back a little on you. Almost like he was asking for permission. So that's not how, like, I mean, that's super polite, but that's like just showing me that person is going to defer to their guest almost no matter what their guest says when I hear that.
Yeah. But I feel like for Brett to agree to do an interview with you, you kind of do have to be someone who is willing to defer to him, you know? Like, Brett's not going to go on someone's show if they're just going to be like, let me show you why you're wrong.
Or even like,
You know, you kind of have to like be real gentle with Brett. Brett has very thin skin.
right. But I would argue that makes this whole ecosystem very bad.
I agree. Yes. Very bad.
That's the problem, is Brett's not going to answer this guy's question. And the guy's not going to be like, listen, I've been pretty fair. I've been pretty polite, but you haven't answered my question. So I'm going to phrase it again. You're positing a new world order conspiracy theory about all of this, and I don't buy it, and I don't think my viewers buy it. Can you tell me?
Well,
his viewers
Brett
buy
doesn't
it.
Brett doesn't like the marketplace of ideas, because every time he brings his ideas, everyone laughs because they're made out of poop.
Pooped he is.
Have you heard that the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory?
I've heard
have.
it described as such.
Right. It has a website. It's not a secret. It's a real thing.
No. The fact that the word has been used isn't the fucking thing that we think is bullshit. The fact that people think it's like Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030, those kinds of old conspiracy theories. That's what people are pointing to, is like the way that people are kind of spinning it and baking it is the conspiracy theory. Yeah. The fucking World Economic Forum and all their fucking genius gave the fucking conspiracy theorists a fucking kind of ominous sounding thing to just keep repeating. Thanks, World Economic Forum. You made it really, really easy on us. Good job, rich people. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks. So they've given the conspiracy movement like a real quick thing they can just fucking mention by like publishing some weird shit about the Great Reset. They don't have the power to do that. There's a bunch of rich people.
Right? And so somehow we are living in an era where something that isn't even hiding itself, a plan to accomplish something.
Also, you just changed the subject completely again.
A wild-eyed conspiracy theory by those who wish not to talk about it.
He does not want to
I
acknowledge
don't know
that the
how
guy
that
is
works.
is
To me, the fact,
bringing up a very good
it has a
point.
website you can go to is highly suggestive of the fact that it exists.
Let's get back to vaccines for a moment.
Sure.
So one of the reasons you're here in the UK, you've attended this conference that's been taking place in Bath.
Yep, this guy just abandoned his question. Boo.
Is
Yeah.
Robert Kennedy Jr.
2 attempts.
Majid Nawaz is in the chair. I
Better
believe.
than a lot of people.
Panel. Robert Malone, who is one of these kind of slightly more controversial vaccine skeptics.
Well, vaccine
theorists.
skeptic, he also holds the patent on the
Right.
core technology of the mRNA vaccine.
That is untrue.
So we had 2
Right.
vaccinologists there, Garrett Vanden Bosch and Robert Malone.
Geert Van den Bosch. Are there that kind of group that's been around for really, some of them have been around for many years? Del Bigtree is also at this conference. They were sort of members of, they're called anti-vaxxers. Let's not use that term. I'm sure
No, use the term.
would reject that. But they were involved in this whole MMR autism controversy in previous years. It is a long-standing kind of lobby against vaccine use in different respects. Do you now find that you have common cause with them, or do you still have important points of distinction with that group?
Well, you're lumping them oddly, right?
Okay.
Del Bigtree was there, as was Robert Malone and Garrett Vanden Bosch. Garrett Vanden Bosch, Robert Malone, and I tangled with Del Bigtree publicly, and actually the audience responded very positively to us doing this in public so they could see what the disagreement was. The fundamental piece of it was that Robert Malone, Garrett Vanden Bosch, and myself believe that vaccines have an important role to play in public health, and Del Bigtree doesn't. And there was a lot of conversation around this. So it wasn't an anti-vax conference.
It was an
I'm not sure
anti-vax
I like
conference.
the term anti-vax because it's been pointed at me so many times, despite the fact that I regard myself as a vaccine enthusiast. But I will tell you, what I have seen happen with the COVID vaccines has me very concerned that although vaccination itself is an extremely important and precious technology, that we are deploying it recklessly, and that the mechanism that we are using to join or to produce these products is simply not capable of doing it responsibly.
Well, that's about as much of this as I could take. We're about an hour and a half in anyway. the UnHerd guy tried, but again, like you were saying, that in order to book Brett and to ever have him back on your show, you have to let it go after you ask a couple times. You can't be like, you're not answering my question. And I wonder if he's got some shit. Like, I wonder if he's got a rider that he sends people when he's going to be interviewed. He seems like the type.
Yeah. It's like Brett has that way of like weaseling out of a question just like a politician does it. You know, just ignore the question a couple times and eventually the reporter is going to move on.
And the other thing that a politician will do, it's like, well, if you don't like the question, just answer a different one.
Yeah.
And that's like what, advisors tell politicians to do. And that's all well and good. Like, you know what a politician is, but Brett's like giving himself some kind of, status as like a public health expert who was right about everything. So
he's competing for the most humble man in the world award.
He is. He's got some competition too, as everybody's going to see in the post game. This UnHerd guy does the same thing David Fuller does, right?
For the most part, but I'd say he's a little more, like he does push a little more than Fuller.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, as soon as David Fuller came out in favor of vaccines, Brett Weinstein like blocked him, and I won't be your friend anymore, because that's how fucking thin Brett's skin is that like fucking David Fuller can piss him off. But what I'm saying is that, like, they're doing the same thing. It's this sort of like empiricism almost like takes a back seat to two people who you're supposed to believe are smart having a conversation about a matter that neither of them have like authority, subject matter authority over.
Yeah. It's like giving Brett a softball interview like that, in my opinion, is being unethical. Because like all you're doing is like platforming him and platforming his crazy beliefs.
That is definitely true. And a lot of people don't see it that way. And like people would say to me, oh, he did ask the question twice. And I'm like, yeah, but he never pressed the dude for an actual answer. The question that he wouldn't answer was a good one. It was essentially, are you not positing a New World Order conspiracy theory?
Yeah.
And one of the problems is you didn't just ask that, but I guess that's the way you never get Brett back on your fucking weird ass fucking fake smart people YouTube channel, right?
Yep.
It's by phrasing that question exactly in that way.
Yeah.
Well, that was infuriating. We're not watching the rest of it during the post game, and HK is getting better at reading the show out. So HK, why don't you read the show out?
All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for consuming this content however you did. And we do the show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. We have other shows if you want to check them out, echoplexmedia.com. Feel free to follow us on Twitch, follow us on Twitter, follow us on whatever podcatcher you're using. Come back and check out the other shows. And if you really like us a lot, you can donate to us at patreon.com/EchoplexMedia, right?
Just Echoplex.
Patreon.com/Echoplex. This is Boomers by Periscope.
See everybody in the post game.